In the golden hush of a late summer afternoon, beneath a sky so vast and blue it seemed eternal, a farmer in the heart of a once mighty empire paused at the edge of his wheat field, wiping sweat from his brow as the stalks swayed gently in the warm breeze. Children laughed in the distance, chasing each other through narrow cobblestone streets, lined with marble columns that had stood for centuries. Merchants haggled in crowded markets filled with the scent of spices and fresh bread, while scholars debated philosophy in shaded academies, and priests chanted hymns that echoed through temples built to last forever. This was the calm before historical collapse, that deceptive serenity, where every rhythm of daily life suggested permanence, where the horizon held no visible threat, and tomorrow promised only more of the same. Yet beneath this surface tranquility, forces were already stirring, invisible at first, like cracks forming deep within the foundations of a grand palace no one dared inspect too closely. No one understood what was coming next, because the collapse did not begin with chaos. It began quietly in the overlooked details of a world that had convinced itself it was invincible. For generations, these civilizations had risen through ingenuity and ambition, their cities sprawling across fertile lands nourished by rivers that never seemed to fail. Trade routes stretched like veins across continents, carrying not just goods but ideas, technologies, and stories of glory. Emperors commissioned monumental works, aqueducts that defied gravity, pyramids aligned with the stars, libraries housing the accumulated wisdom of ages, symbols of human triumph over nature and time. Daily life unfolded in predictable patterns. Farmers rose with the dawn to tend crops that fed growing populations. Artisans crafted intricate tools and ornaments in bustling workshops, and families gathered around hearths at night, sharing meals and tales of ancestors who had overcome every obstacle. The air carried the steady hum of progress, the clatter of carts on well-maintained roads, the ring of hammers shaping iron and bronze into instruments of both creation and defense. In this era of apparent abundance, social bonds felt unbreakable, laws seemed just, and the gods, or the systems they represented, appeared to smile upon the realm. But history teaches us that such peaks often conceal the first tremors, those subtle shifts that historians would later identify as the earliest warnings, dismissed by contemporaries as mere inconveniences in an otherwise flawless order. Life before the rupture moved with the unhurried confidence of routine. In the public squares, orators spoke passionately of virtue and destiny, while crowds nodded in agreement, their bellies full from recent harvests. Women drew water from communal fountains adorned with intricate carvings, exchanging gossip and plans for festivals that celebrated the continuity of tradition. Young men trained in disciplined formations, their weapons polished, ready to protect borders that had not been seriously challenged in living memory. Evenings brought music drifting from open windows, the flicker of oil lamps illuminating scrolls of poetry and law, while merchants counted profits by candlelight, dreaming of greater wealth for their children. The environment itself seemed complicit in the illusion. Mild seasons, abundant rains, forests teeming with game, and seas yielding fish without exhaustion. This was the immersive texture of stability, where every sense reinforced the belief that the current order was natural, eternal, and self-sustaining. Yet in the quiet moments between these scenes, when the city slept and only the watchmen patrolled silent walls, faint undercurrents stirred, whispers of discontent among the indebted, reports of distant raids that grew slightly more frequent, and a nagging sense among the wise that resources once plentiful were now requiring ever greater effort to extract. Still, the majority carried on, lulled by the familiarity of their days, unaware that these were the early invisible warning signs, seeds of instability planted in soil long thought fertile. The warning signs arrived not as thunderclaps, but as persistent drizzles, easy to ignore amid the noise of prosperity. Soil in outlying provinces began to yield less despite intensive labor, a consequence of overcultivation and subtle climate variations that altered rainfall patterns without immediate catastrophe. Trade caravans returned with stories of restless tribes on the frontiers, their movements attributed to seasonal migration rather than deeper pressures. Within the capital, corruption crept into administrative offices like ivy on ancient stone, officials skimming revenues meant for infrastructure, while public works showed the first signs of deferred maintenance, crumbling bridges, silted canals, and granaries less full than records claimed. Scholars noted increasing inequality, with wealth concentrating among a small elite, while small farmers fell into debt cycles, selling their land to survive. Environmental strains mounted quietly. Deforestation for fuel and building materials thinned once lush woodlands, leading to erosion that choked rivers during rare floods. Population growth, once a source of strength, strained food supplies and sanitation, fostering pockets of disease that flared and subsided without widespread alarm. Leaders reassured the populace with grand spectacles and promises of renewal. But the data, if anyone had systematically collected it, would have revealed a system stretched thin, its resilience eroding under the weight of unchecked expansion and internal complacency. By the time these signs became impossible to dismiss entirely, the momentum toward rupture had already gathered force. As months turned to years, tension rose like a slow-building storm on the horizon, its clouds barely noticeable until they darkened the sky. Political factions within the ruling class grew more divided, their debates turning acrimonious as resources dwindled, and blame shifted from external threats to internal rivals. Economic pressures mounted, with inflation eroding the value of currency and taxes rising to fund ever larger military campaigns against perceived enemies who were themselves reacting to similar scarcities. Social fabrics frayed at the edges. Urban poor crowded into makeshift districts where crime and unrest simmered, while rural populations, burdened by conscription and requisitions, began migrating towards cities in search of opportunity that no longer existed in abundance. External alliances, once reliable, strained under mutual suspicions, and key trade partners faced their own internal troubles, disrupting the flow of essential goods. Environmental degradation accelerated. Droughts that lingered longer than memory served, plagues of locusts or blights that devastated key crops, yet responses remained fragmented, focused on short-term relief rather than systemic reform. The air in public forums grew thick with anxiety masked as bravado, and nights echoed with rumors carried on the wind. Citizens felt the subtle shift in daily rhythms: longer lines for bread, guarded conversations in marketplaces, a pervasive unease that no official proclamation can fully dispel. The system was not yet failing openly, but the pressures were compounding, each decision narrowing the path to stability. Key decisions and mistakes, born of hubris and miscalculation. Rulers, desperate to maintain the facade of strength, launched ambitious projects, grand temples, expanded frontiers, lavish entertainments that drained treasuries already strained. Advisors who warned of limits were sidelined in favor of those promising quick victories through conquest or increased extraction from the provinces. Alliances were abandoned for isolationist policies, or conversely, entangling commitments were made without full appreciation of their costs. Environmental warnings from local farmers and engineers were overruled by central decrees prioritizing immediate output over sustainability. Corruption deepened as officials prioritized personal gain, falsifying reports to hide the true extent of shortages and decay. Military leaders, facing restless troops, pushed for aggressive campaigns that yielded temporary spoils, but exhausted manpower and provoked stronger coalitions of adversaries. Economic policies favored the elite, exacerbating inequality and eroding the loyalty of the common people who bore the heaviest burdens. These choices, made in the name of preserving glory, instead hollowed out the institutions that had once held the civilization together. The calm had been an illusion sustained by denial, and now the accumulated weight of these errors pressed down with inexorable force, setting the stage for the moment the system would begin to fail. The moment the system began to fail arrived not with a single cataclysm, but through a cascade of interconnected breakdowns that unfolded over weeks and months, each feeding the next. A prolonged drought, combined with already depleted soils, triggered widespread crop failure, emptying granaries faster than they could be replenished. Supply chains fractured as merchants withheld goods amid rising prices and banditry on trade routes. News of distant provinces in open revolt reached the capital, where authorities, overstretched and divided, responded with inadequate or overly harsh measures that only fueled further dissent. Disease, long simmering in overcrowded districts, erupted into full epidemics as weakened populations offered little resistance. The streets, once vibrant with commerce, grew quieter, filled instead with the murmurs of fear and the occasional clash of desperate crowds. Infrastructure, neglected for too long, buckled under sudden demands. Aqueducts cracked, roads washed out, isolating communities and amplifying scarcity. Leaders issued proclamations of resolve, but the confidence in their voices rang hollow to those watching the first waves of refugees streaming toward the city gates. This was the tipping point, where the invisible cracks became visible fissures, and the intricate web of interdependence that had defined the civilization started to unravel thread by thread. No single event defined it, but the convergence left no room for reversal. In the wake of these failures, human consequences unfolded with brutal clarity, transforming ordered societies into landscapes of social breakdown. Families that had known security now faced starvation, leading to desperate migrations, the abandonment of farms, and the rise of makeshift camps on the outskirts of failing cities. Trust evaporated as neighbors turned on one another over dwindling resources, while crime surged and authority figures lost their legitimacy amid accusations of hoarding and incompetence. Children orphaned by disease or conflict wandered the ruins of once thriving districts, their eyes reflecting a world stripped of innocence. The elite retreated behind fortified walls, but even they could not escape the spreading chaos. Assassinations, coups, and waves of emigration drained the talent and knowledge that might have salvaged remnants of the old order. Cultural treasures, symbols of continuity, were looted or left to decay as survival took precedence over preservation. Sounds of the old life faded, the laughter in markets replaced by cries of the hungry, the hymns in temples drowned by the clamor of riots. Fear became a constant companion, shaping every interaction, every decision. This breakdown was not merely physical, but psychological, a collective shattering of the belief in progress and protection that had sustained generations through earlier hardships. The long-term historical impact of such collapses reverberated far beyond the immediate ruins, reshaping maps, cultures, and the trajectory of human development for centuries. Surviving fragments of the old empire scattered into successor states, blending traditions with new influences brought by conquerors or migrants, creating hybrid societies that carried both the scars and the innovations of what came before. Lost knowledge, techniques of engineering, governance, agriculture had to be painstakingly rediscovered or adapted from oral memories, slowing advancement in the intervening dark ages. Trade networks contracted, leading to localized economies and technological regressions in some regions, while others rose in the power vacuum, laying foundations for future powers. Environmental recovery, ironically, sometimes followed as reduced populations allowed lands to heal, demonstrating nature's resilience even as human memory lingered on the fall. These ruptures influenced philosophies, religions, and legal systems, with later generations drawing cautionary tales from the debris, stories of hubris, fragility, and the cost of ignoring warning signs. The collapse did not erase humanity's capacity for renewal, but served as a profound reset, proving that no civilization, however grand, exists outside the cycles of rise and inevitable transformation. Yet as the dust settled on abandoned forums and overgrown temples, a haunting reflection emerges from the silence of these lost worlds. The calm before collapse was never truly calm. It was a period of accumulated vulnerabilities masked by habit and hope. We walk today through our own cities of glass and steel, surrounded by the rhythms of modern life that feel equally eternal, yet the patterns of history whisper of recurring vulnerabilities, strained resources, deepening divides, environmental shifts, and decisions made in the pursuit of short-term stability. The voices of the past, carried on the wind through ruined arches and forgotten roads, urge a vigilance that contemporaries rarely possessed. In the end, every golden age carries within it the seeds of its own unraveling, not as punishment, but as the natural consequence of complexity meeting limits. And so the story continues, not as a tale of inevitable doom, but as a mirror held up to our own moment, where the calm persists only as long as we choose to truly see what lies beneath the surface. The collapse, when it comes, will again begin quietly, in the overlooked spaces between our certainties, reminding us that civilizations are not monuments, but living processes, fragile and wondrous in their brief flourishing against the vast indifference of time.